Hello, and welcome to the Concert Chat podcast of Reno Chamber Orchestra's 25-26 season. I'm your host, Catherine Beeson, and I'm joined by music director Kelly Kuo for the podcast today, which we are calling Coffee with Kuo, because who doesn't want to wake up and get energized with Kelly's insights? Nobody, that's who.
Oh,
Kelly,
well, maybe you should talk to my wife.
no comment. Kelly, what are we going to be sharing with our audience today?
Today we're talking about our second concert of the season, which will be presented on November 15th and 16th, that media is calling Stravinsky, but I'm calling the American Dream because we are presenting 4 works by composers who immigrated to the United States. You know, as a child of an immigrant parents, I think immigration is largely to thank for the melting pot that we have here in this country, that we all learn from each other and grow from each other. And I just want to help reinforce that in our musical styles.
I think that's fantastic. So if you are new to the podcast, and for those of you who are watching, you'll see just off camera periodically, Kelly and I each have a drink on hand, and we're pairing a sort of a leaded and unleaded beverage with each of the subscription concerts for this season. And today's pairings are definitely caffeine inspired. I've got an American Dream. And Kelly, what are you drinking?
I am essentially drinking a decaf hazelnut mocha, which is, the same ingredients, but unfortunately unleaded on my side. But next time, I think we're going to trade, and I need to do the leaded version, and you do the unleaded.
Okay, you know what? That's fair. That's fair. And maybe the interview will go better. Who knows? You all will be the judge. So cheers to this program.
Cheers.
Delicious. If you want to pause the show and make your own, we've posted the recipe on the website, renochamberorchestra.org. So let's get started. Kelly, you mentioned already the influence of immigrants and of immigration on the sort of the melting pot of America, but this is in some ways an extension of the Silk Road. So that we have all of these mixing and matching of cultures and the influences that get wrapped up and make that melting pot. And I do think that is one of the things that makes human cultures just so incredible and rich, this tapestry. So I'm really, really glad that we can delve into to your programming ideas. How does the theme or the thread running through this program, how does it end up manifesting in the particular composers and works that you choose for a program like this?
There are a lot of things I think about in terms of balancing a program, and there has to be variety, there has to be contrast, there has to be not only, when I say contrast, not only in terms of the musical language, but maybe the ensembles on stage, the sizes, the instruments. As much contrast as I can possibly give in a short period of time is great. Sometimes the composers have done them themselves within a larger structure. They might have more intimate sections that create that contrast, but variety is the spice of life, and I try to give that in my programs.
That's fantastic. An extra cheers to that, just so that we can really get into the leaded and unleaded. And also, just as a side note, this American Dream is actually a combination of multiple ingredients, each at its own. It's a 1-to-1 on all of the, I don't know why I'm going into this drink, but it's a 1-to-1 ratio on all of the very different ingredients. And so that really nicely ties in. So thank you for that drink suggestion.
Did you also notice that there are 4 main alcoholic ingredients in the American Dream, and there are 4 composers on this program?
I mean, the layers of planning are replete here, Kelly.
I'm pulling them out of the other side of my mouth.
Well, I am really, really glad to be here today talking with you about this program. It's a really exciting program for so many reasons, and we have 4 different composers. One of them we referenced in the last episode, actually, Igor Stravinsky, as someone who David Diamond met during his time studying with Nadia Boulanger. So we have Igor Stravinsky's Dumbarton Oaks, which is just a fantastic piece of music. We have Eric Korngold's Much Ado About Nothing. We have Kurt Weill's Symphony No. 2. And then kind of in the middle of that lineup, we have a piece by a living composer, Zhou, which is a flute concerto. So I think it's great. You featured a clarinet concerto on the first program. You've got a flute concerto on the second program. So I'm really excited to get started talking about each of these 4 pieces. And I wondered if you'd like to start with the Stravinsky.
Absolutely. This is, of all the pieces on the program, probably it is what you could call a core piece of repertoire from the canon for chamber orchestra. The Dumbarton Oaks is sort of a test piece for young conductors. It is something that some unaccompanied, or I should say not unaccompanied, it is a piece that some unconducted orchestras like the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and Orpheus Chamber Orchestra will perform without a conductor. They'll rehearse it enough and they all know the piece well enough that it just becomes a part of their staple. And I thought what a perfect time to introduce this piece, because it takes a small ensemble that's intimate but a virtuosos essentially, because it's a concerto, and as a concerto it gives a place in each part of the orchestra, a place to show off or to become exposed more than they might be more comfortable with in their other circumstances. But they get a chance to play difficult music for people to see, and it just focuses every type of dance energy that you might expect for such a compact piece. I say this energy and this positive, really bright music because it was written at probably one of the darkest points in Stravinsky's life. At the time he was commissioned, he was living in Europe, and his daughter, Mika, was ill with tuberculosis and eventually died of tuberculosis the year after. So he was composing this concerto in E-flat at the time that his daughter was suffering. And his way to maybe comfort himself was to play a lot of Bach during the composition of this concerto. And so, of course, the Brandenburg concertos were amongst those compositions that he was working through. And musicologists will point out passages that might either be direct steals or borrowing, or just little phrases from his 3rd and 6th Brandenburg concertos that might have made their way subconsciously or consciously into this piece. And it's for a piece that was written at such a dark point in his life, it's become such a piece of joy for orchestras to play it.
I think that is really interesting background information. So you mentioned this high energy and this sort of dance energy. You also mentioned that the orchestra parts are it's a concerto, right? And so you said that these are difficult or challenging for the orchestra. Maybe they're showing themselves in a way, each individual player or section might show themselves in a way that they're not used to. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. There's a lot of pairings of horns. There's individual woodwinds who get these very exposed passages that might just be a blip on the radar, but they're challenging. These come out of nowhere. And of course, you have, for the composer of Rite of Spring, you expect rhythmic complications. And so this piece is full of things that are rhythmically challenging to play, but of course don't sound difficult for the audience to hear. And that's one of the big things about Stravinsky, is it's so unpredictable for the audience, but at the same time, it is one of those pieces that after you get used to playing a lot, it just becomes second nature. And my goal is that these kind of staple pieces of the repertoire become so second nature to us as an ensemble that it shows us that we can do hard things.
Well, I mean, I have heard the Reno Chamber Orchestra, and I know that they can do hard things. I'm sure that the players are really excited about this kind of work. I know, as a musician, as a performing musician myself, the opportunity to sort of marry artistry and, if I should not go to musician hell for saying this, the jock side of performance, when you can just really show technique and kind of get into, I don't know, just that technical flair, I guess. Sometimes that is, it adds an element of fun that maybe is not the main idea that you want to get across to the audience, but it elevates that dance kind of that joyful dance kind of feeling that you're getting to. I really
It's
always
so bubbly.
enjoy.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so, okay, but now I'm going to hold you to this. You mentioned that chamber orchestras who become very familiar with Dumbarton Oaks often will perform it without conductor. So are you feeling threatened a little? Tell the truth.
I think a conductor only helps in this particular case in terms of time management. I have no doubt that our orchestra could perform this without a conductor, but it would take a lot more time to put together. And when you're trying to put together a longer program, unless the rest of the program is structured such that allows that amount of time, it really does help to have someone just helping to manage the amount of time that the orchestra has to talk about things and make decisions.
Great. So that was a great job security answer. Thank you so much for that one. I do think that sometimes when we speak about music being difficult or challenging or unpredictable, I think is the word that you used, it can seem to a listener hearing these kinds of things that it might be difficult or challenging to listen to, or that unpredictability might cause some, I don't know, barriers for listening. How do you feel like the participation is from the listener who's never heard Dumbarton Oaks before? What do you think that they can expect?
This was in a period that came after Pulcinella, and for Stravinsky, this is, for those who are not super familiar with Stravinsky's works other than the Rite of Spring, this is almost complete opposite 180 direction from Rite of Spring, in terms that it looks in the rearview mirror, so to speak, at the music of the past. And music such as Dumbarton Oaks could be labeled as neoclassical. It takes some forms of the Baroque and of the early classical and blends it with the modern sensibility of the composer in question. And so pieces like Dumbarton Oaks, even if you haven't heard it, there'll be something familiar about it or predictable in terms of structure. Let's say the Concerto Grosso, which a lot of people who are fans of the Baroque know is basically interplay between small ensemble and a larger ensemble. And that's essentially what Dumbarton Oaks is. It's based upon this Concerto Grosso, where every single member of this ensemble gets a chance to step out into the limelight, however briefly, and get a chance to shine, and then step back into the broader texture. So audiences who are used to hearing Baroque music will not find that strange whatsoever, because they're used to hearing it. It's just built in. It's baked into the structure, and that's what this piece is. Now, as far as dissonance, there is a little bit of that, but at the same time, Stravinsky doesn't stray too far away from that, because he does label it as a concerto in E flat. So there is a sense of tonality that is home base for him.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting that you've used the word dissonance, and I just want to point out that for anyone listening, there is this kind of colloquial attachment to the word dissonance that just that people use the word dissonance sometimes just to mean jarring or ugly or non-melodic. And in our world, in our inside baseball terminology, dissonance is really just notes that have physical properties that kind of fight with one another instead of find harmony with one another. And you need both the fighting, because that gives motion, it gives forward momentum to sounds, and you need that agreement, those agreement sounds. And with any string of notes, a chord that happens simultaneously, you'll find dissonance and consonance, which is the opposite of that. So when you're talking about dissonance in terms of this concerto, which you said is in E flat, that's a key structure that creates a sense of sonic home, that we feel a place, a sense of place. That's consonance. That's a grounding that's there. But then there will be dissonance within that, and that's sort of like, I've worked with some Hungarian jazz musicians in the past that will call it, just a little paprikash, they say. It's a little paprikash. And so, and I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, a little spice. And so, I think that's more what you're talking about here, right? When you use the word dissonance, it's in that kind of realm. Yeah.
Absolutely. They're just, I would say that they are little spices that show up every now and then to remind you that we are, in fact, still in the 20th century. But at the same time, it's all in the service of really listenable and fun music.
Yeah, I remember the very first time that I had an opportunity to play this piece, just feeling like it was so fun just to be inside the orchestra, experiencing it as a support to the momentary solos that would happen here and there, and also that athleticism that I referenced earlier. That I called it, the sort of the jock side, but that athleticism of the counting. There's a lot of mixed meter, so you don't start the piece out in a 4/4 time and march through until the end, like you have in a typical classical era piece. So this is a
Right.
neoclassical style, but you'll have, some movement in a three or a triangle shape, some movement in a square or bars, 2 or 4. Sometimes you have a 5 or a 7, and so all of this is mixed and thrown in here. We're getting more to that melting pot, I guess. That sort of theme.
Your story, your mention of the mixed meters reminds me of actually one of the last times I conducted this piece, where I actually physically dropped my baton in one of the movements. It was the first or the third movement. It was a fast movement. I dropped it, and instead of continuing to conduct with my hands, I actually stepped off my podium and went to pick up my baton as the orchestra continues to play. So talking about not needing a conductor, they really didn't need me to conduct, but somehow in my young age of conducting, I felt it was completely unproblematic to bend over and reach down and pick up a baton in the mixed meter passage. That's
Well, there goes your job security, man. I was trying to underscore it for you, but that's it.
We'll cut this from the
Yeah, it'll definitely be cut for sure, 100% cut. Okay, well,
my goodness.
so we're starting with this piece of music, this Stravinsky, this very joyous, sort of celebratory and dance-like music, and then we go from. Yes, go ahead.
I want to say, before we leave this piece, I do have to mention, because people are wondering, why Dumbarton Oaks? Why is this piece called Dumbarton Oaks? And I think we have to let them know is because the people who commissioned this piece from Stravinsky, this Concerto Grosso, this piece for chamber orchestra, lived in a house that was named Dumbarton Oaks. That was in a section of Washington, D.C., of Georgetown, actually. And if you're trying to find this house today, it still exists. It's a mansion, but it's now a research center for pre-Columbian art, of all things. So it's still, if you go there, you'll see the gardens around, which were said to have maybe inspired Stravinsky in terms of structure, and maybe some of the piece, the conspiracy theorists will go out and look at the gardens as they existed at that time and figure out if there's any direct relationship into the architecture of the music that Stravinsky wrote.
That is some conspiracy theory I can get behind.
And for even more, Stravinsky was supposed to have conducted this premiere of this piece, but he was unfortunately suffering from tuberculosis himself at the time. And so guess who was the premier conductor of Dumbarton Oaks? Our friend Nadia Boulanger.
You're kidding. Wow.
I'm not kidding.
So the very Nadia Boulanger that we referenced in the first episode for the season premiere concert that was so influential to three of those four composers on that first concert. That's incredible. That is incredible. You are masterful at making the thread that takes us from even the first concert to the second concert of the season. I can't wait to see where this is going. So the second piece of music on the concert is by Zhou, and it's a flute concerto. And I think that of the four composers, for sure Zhou is probably the least well known, and also is the only living composer represented on this program. What can you tell us about him?
Zhou is a Grammy-nominated composer. He blends, talking about melting pots, Chinese-inspired music with all the things that you might expect one experiences here in the United States. Film music, and just really colorful orchestrations of the current American orchestrators of the day. It's just filled with color, and at the same time, the flute played a very, very important role in traditional Chinese music. So his piece of this flute concerto is basically a journey from traditional Chinese through Baroque to modern to Barber even, where you have this musical lineage put out for people to see and to hear in the flute concerto.
I love that. That's amazing. So anyone who was listening to the first episode might remember that you had a similar way to speak about the clarinet concerto of Aaron Copland, starting kind of in one style and then morphing into another style. And so you're saying that he's pulled these influences from various places. How do you think that the flute concerto of Zhou, how do you think that it, if it does pull all of these influences from different places, how does it hang together so well?
Because they're all dances. They're slow Baroque dances. They're fast dances. They are some meditations within the context of a dance. I think that's really that. Plus, you have this beautifully lyric instrument, or I should say, an instrument that's associated with singing a long lyric line, and just takes advantage of those moments, as well as the ability of a flute player to have, rapid notes, repeated notes, even with double tonguing, and it's just highly virtuosic at the same time as very, very lyrical.
So we're starting with this Stravinsky piece that you've kind of characterized as very joyous and sort of dancey. We're moving to a flute concerto that has dance elements as well. And so two concertos in a row, one that features the whole orchestra, one that features the sort of a heroic soloist, with the orchestra. And then we go into Eric Korngold's Much Ado About Nothing. Talk to us about Eric Korngold. He's fascinating.
Korngold was, he was a type of prodigious youngster that would make you either want to quit your day job if you're a composer, or just proclaim the genius and celebrate the genius. I mean, composers like Richard Strauss and Gustav Mahler were basically bending over and bowing to this talent. I remember there's a story of him playing a cantata that he wrote at the age of 10.
Yeah.
For Mahler.
Yeah.
And Mahler said, "Dude, you are a genius, and you need to study with this man, my man Zemlinsky, at the Vienna Conservatory." And then he composed a ballet called The Snowman that Zemlinsky was so impressed with that he orchestrated it himself.
Wow.
He said, "This is a good piece." And so then you have Puccini, who listened to this opera that he wrote called Violante, which I've never even heard. But in any case, it spoke great things, because just a few years later he wrote Die Tote Stadt, which is this amazing, huge, massive opera, grand scale. And he wrote at the age of 23. So, you have this super talented monster of a musician composer with prodigious gifts that is just taking over the world. So much so that he was taken to Hollywood by the famous German director Max Reinhardt. And that's where, if you want to say, the second part of his life started, because he composed 19 film scores for Hollywood. Probably the most famous of which is The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938, I think. And at the time, he was Hollywood's highest paid composer.
Yeah, I mean, he was the John Williams of his day, you know, and I think that for me, my first knowledge about Korngold was as a film composer. I didn't realize that he had all of this incredible sort of library of works as a sort of formal classical composer, and really, if you think about it, film music could have sounded like anything, you know. But we have this sort of the stamp, so that he made the expectation for film music to come after him be this big orchestral kind of sound. So we have, orchestral musicians, symphonic musicians have a lot to thank, I think, for the template that he made, the expectations that he made for the public.
I mean, if you're thinking about, this is exactly the same time period as Stravinsky's writing the Martin Oaks, and so you could understand why there were a lot of composers in this day who were criticizing Korngold for, essentially selling out to Hollywood.
Yeah.
So in a way, he felt like he was still composing what you want to call non-cinematic works. The Violin Concerto, which is such a good piece,
Incredible.
was written in the same time that he was working on these Hollywood scores. So and that's certainly a reason why it's so popular, because everyone recognizes the language.
I agree, and it's true. It's very emotion forward, I guess. Feelings forward, and so it's. I can see how people would say, "Oh, he's selling out," or he's hewing to these sort of older ideals or styles. But my goodness, it's just such great music. So tell us about Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah, so this is around the same period that he was writing Die Todesstadt, the opera. So he was 22 years old. He was commissioned to write incidental music for Much Ado About Nothing. Mm-hmm. Now, if you talk about music that's been inspired by a playwright, there's no one higher on that list than William Shakespeare, right? There's like so much music that's been written throughout history that was written for plays or accompanying plays or inspired by plays of Shakespeare. And so he wrote 14 different musical numbers for production of Much Ado About Nothing for the Vienna Burgtheater in 1918. Mm-hmm. And they are everything that you might expect from his orchestration, full of melody. Everything that would make him famous later in the movies was very much already on display in these short pieces. Now, after that, a couple years later, the play was revived, and at that time, Korngold essentially took two concert suites from the score, one for chamber orchestra and another one for violin and piano. Essentially, extra ways to earn a little extra money for himself to have pieces that are performed. The only difference between these two suites is that the orchestra version has a short overture, and it's very delightful, very, very witty, and it's been compared a lot to the overture to The Marriage of Figaro because of its just melodic energy and always this bubbling nature. So it's the future Korngold already at work.
I love that. Okay, and then we go from Korngold's Much Ado About Nothing to finish the program with Kurt Weill's Symphony No. 2.
Right.
So let's really get in there. Kurt Weill, also kind of straddling some different, sort of musical territory, right? And I personally have not ever played any of his music, so I'm very excited to get into this with you.
Yeah, this is Kurt Weill is a composer that we don't hear in a concert hall a lot because he was writing mostly for the theater. Mm-hmm. He was very, very famous for all of his works that involved singers or actors on stage, or a combination of both. Mahagoni is very, very famous. The Seven Deadly Sins, I mentioned earlier, also very famous. It's this German jazzy style that it could be called club music in a way. There was, at the same time, it was satire. It's full of this bite, and sometimes he came up with these amazingly beautiful nostalgic melodies, and then he had no problem just to bump and grind it as well. Just really sleazy in some ways when he was portraying characters. It's just full of this. It's basically painting people that he could see in his mind and portraying them through their music, and that's very much what he is associated with, and where he made a lot of his living. But the Nazis really didn't like him, so he sort of needed to get away from that. And he went to Paris, and where he escaped, and he wrote a second symphony, this one that's going to be on our program. And the conductor was Bruno Walter, who was not an unknown conductor, who premiered this work. And he really loved it, and the public was enthused, but the press was not. And so much was the press and the criticism, so heavy was that condemnation that he never once again wrote another piece that was not written for the theater.
Wow.
This was the
Symphony
last
number 2.
piece he wrote.
Wow.
It was the last piece he wrote for the concert hall as a purely musical form that had no explicit program in mind.
And that's a lot to take in. You said that he got, sort of some bad reviews for this symphony.
Yes, I don't have any specific quotes. I wish I did at the top of my mind.
I just think, look.
I think one of them said something like he should stick to theater. Essentially,
yeah. Don't quit your day job. That's
exactly.
That's great. Thanks. It's interesting for me. I mean, look, I do enjoy particularly bad reviews of particularly great celebrated works, because it's just delicious to dine out on somebody's opinion that hasn't stood up as well as the music has.
Right.
But it is really interesting to put things into that perspective, right? We've talked a little bit in this episode and in the previous episode as well about the way that people's music is received in the time that they're writing it as being out of style and or out of step with the times. And I do think, and you mentioned earlier too about people suggesting that Eric Korngold was selling out, and what does that even mean? I mean, they're composing music. They're composing music.
It means they're jealous.
Yeah, it means they're jealous. Exactly. And so, are they getting hugely rich? Like, was Kurt Weill just rich beyond his wildest dreams and sort of moonlighting as a symphonic composer? For him to not write another piece of non-programmatic music or non-theater related music after receiving poor reviews for this symphony, it's something to really consider. Why do you think you programmed Symphony Number 2? Why do you think that it's worthwhile for all of us to listen to it today on the Reno Chamber Orchestra series?
I think it's a gem. I found myself listening. I drop the needle when I go through rabbit holes and find music that has not really been in the public spotlight. I just go through YouTube and drop the needle on various parts of the piece, and I just found with this piece, I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool. That's a great sound. That sounds familiar. That sounds like Weill's, Seven Deadly Sins, or this sounds so unusual. I love this texture. This is exciting. And I found this with probably no other piece on this program in the same way, though I thought this is, and it's written for a classical orchestra, essentially. Well, there are 2 trombones in it, but essentially it's exactly the type of piece that our orchestra should be performing. I don't know why it's not a staple of the repertoire. I think it's an amazing piece. He even has a surtitle called Symphonische Fantasie, a fantastic symphony.
Oh.
And that's what was the sort of undertitle of this particular piece. So it's fanciful. It sounds cabaret in some ways. It's heartfelt. There's so many great things of great theater writers like Puccini They got famous for writing those operas, and yet at the same time didn't necessarily write works for the concert hall. And then you have people like Verdi, who was an amazing opera writer, but at the same time came out with pieces like the Requiem, which is definitely for the theater, for the stage. And I think people who are able to write theatrically, if they have the right architecture to support their work, even if there's no specific program in mind, it cannot help but be filled with emotion and color and energy.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. That's true of Mozart's works. It's true of Tchaikovsky's works as well. Everything seems sort of like it could just instantly be part of a theatrical presentation. There's something very dramatic about it, you know? I love all of that. Well, what are you most excited about for this program now that we've gotten through, you know, some of the nuts and bolts? What are you personally looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to doing the flute concerto of Zhou Tian very much. I love the idea of connecting the Symphony No. 2 of Weill. I've only been associated with his theatrical works, and so the chance to be able to produce this piece is great. Now, here's a little piece of information that you might not have known. Do you know who commissioned this symphony?
No.
It was the Princess Edmund de Polignac, who was born Vineretta Singer, Singer, as in the sewing machine, Fortune.
Really?
Yes, the American-born heiress to the sewing machine, Fortune, was also a leading Parisian patron of the arts, who ordered works from Ravel, Debussy, Stravinsky, blah, 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 and this was Weill's commission.
My goodness, I had no idea. And now, so this is what I love about these interviews in podcast episodes with you, Kelly, is that we can all have a chance to win Jeopardy.
You're just saying we all get a chance to nerd out.
The nerding is strong here, okay? You know, we're not hiding any of that. My goodness. Well, any final thoughts or anything else to add?
I'm getting to the end of my drink, but hopefully there's more where that came from.
Same here. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for another great episode. I am so excited to hear more and to spend more time with you as we go through this season. And I'm sure that the Reno Chamber Orchestra fans are really excited for this concert as well. Cheers to you.
Cheers, and on to the next episode.
Oh.